Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is a professor of psychology. He's a friend of mine's. I consider him like a brother. We've had many good conversations. It's unfortunate that we don't talk as much as I feel like we should, because I think we have a lot of important things to say. But now that I have this podcast, I'm going to get to introduce him and our thoughts to the rest of the world or anyone else who's interested. Gerrie, can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a professor of educational psychology. So basically, I investigate why people develop math anxiety, why people choke under pressure when they're taking tests, and that kind of thing. And I've been in my current position for about 3 years. I teach classes, I mentor, I do that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, awesome, man. Thank you. Okay, so one of the big things I want to start off with this because for those who don't know or whatever, my mom passed away a while back from alcoholism. It's something that I've had issues with. I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic. A lot of people that I know wouldn't say that either. But it's something that I had tried for a while to kick, and it just seemed like I couldn't do it. But after my mom passed away, now I'm a dad, and I have drug and alcohol issues on both sides of my family. I kind of just dedicated to it more. And this past Halloween, I made 1 year sober.
mm,
Absolutely no alcohol,
congrats.
no nothing. And I gotta say, the difference in my life, man, like mentally, oh my God, it's like I didn't know I was living in a fog. Like if you've always been in a fog, and then someone moves the fog, you're like, hey, look, there's a building over there. Look at that forest.
hmm hmm
You know what I mean? But that's only one part of it. The other part was that I was having a lot of issues with my life. I just couldn't seem to get to a better place. And so I'm not religious, but I started talking to God. Almost every time I close my eyes to relax, I just saying, hey, first to humble myself, just say, look, whatever I'm doing on my own, I'm not capable of accomplishing what I want to accomplish or being where I want to be. So please help me. You know what I mean? I started doing that. And then when things started getting better for me, hey, thank you for this. Thank you for that. So I always start off with that. And then if I'm still conscious, because I usually do this late at night or early in the morning, or if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll just have like an open dialogue. Whatever's on my mind. You know how when you dream, just weird stuff just pop up, and it's all related to a higher power. And I just noticed the effects of that. And I know that you're a religious person, and I've wondered if you could share your thoughts on what I had to say.
Well, I mean, I gotta say that I think it's great what you're doing. I mean, sometimes people like to think that you should join a more formalized form of religion, but I think what you're doing is, 10 times better than what most people in institutional religions are doing. They're a lot of times people sort of walk around without having much of a personal relationship. They get attached to the identity of being Christian or being Baptist or being
Yeah.
Catholic, but they don't actually engage in that personal relationship. And yet here, you have no, I think you don't have an identity for an organized religion, and yet here you are, thanking God, asking them to be a part of your life. And I gotta say, it's really impressive. Here's the funny part about all this. I am quote unquote religious, and yet what you described is actually more than what I do personally. I'm one of those people I was talking about.
Oh.
I identify, but lately I've just been going through like a really dry period in my faith where I rarely pray. I rarely talk to God.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on in my head, but I just don't feel that connection. And I think I could will that connection, but right now it's not there, And I'm a firm believer in in seasons in your life, And it seems like I've entered a particular season where that's just not. And it sounds like you've entered a season where you're exploring that personal part of your faith. Maybe you'll enter a season eventually where you'll give that God a name, and maybe you won't. But there are seasons to life, and right now I'm just trying to be okay with that. Not panic, not feel depressed, not feel like what happened to me is just no. Okay, right now it's the season for not praying for some reason, and I accept that. So I'm just trying to be okay with it.
So I just want to add a real quick to that there one of the reasons why I decided to
hmm
do that is because I just noticed, reflecting back on my life, that there were times just really difficult times that didn't make
Okay.
sense to me. If we're playing the law of averages here, right? There's so many bad things that could happen to you at a given time where if it's over that average, you got to say, but there's something fishy going on here. Is someone, am I paranoid? Is someone out to get me? Or, just kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I started when I was in the Navy. It was my last 3 years. It was the worst years in my military career. And so I decided to get out. And now looking back on it, I say, how did that happen? I never had an experience like that before. And it kept on for three
Mm-hmm.
years. And I read The Alchemist and stuff like that. He talked about being on your path, but I didn't take it too serious. And then I went to school. As soon as I left, man, I met my wife, and we started a family. Like, it was great. And I decided I wanted to be a writer, but yet I was following the path of being a
Mm-hmm.
psychotherapist. And I did that. I got a job and everything, and then everything went wrong there again. Like, there's no way it could have gone that wrong without something else happening. Like, how could it be that bad? So I ended up getting
Okay.
out of that, and then I joined the military. That felt right, and then some things in the military kind of went real wrong for me. And my mom passed away, and then I made this change. And thinking back on that book, The Alchemist, I felt like now that I'm talking to God, it's like I was on the wrong path each time. The universe, let's just say, right? Because not everybody believes in the word of God, and I don't even know if I believe in the word of God. I'm just using God to describe X. You know what I mean? So yeah, but I do feel like that's a big possibility that somehow the universe or God or X and letting you know when you're not where you should be. And that's where I kind of accepted, like, okay, now that I'm writing, now I'm doing this podcast, and everything is just changing. I feel right. I feel a lot better now.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because that's something that I've been exploring intellectually, maybe not so much emotionally or relationally. This idea of finding meaning in what seems like random events, you know, this is something that
Mm-hmm.
actually, a lot of people across cultures have believed, right, that if you listen for the voice of God, He will guide you, and obviously in
Right.
institutional religion, that's considered, formal prayer. But it's kind of interesting because a lot of people they just talk to God, and there's actually a lot of really
Right.
fascinating something called a manual prayer. And the basic idea is that you try
Uh
to
huh.
talk to God as if He was someone who was literally there. So some people say, "Oh, you mean an imaginary
Right.
friend?" And actually, that's not an unfair comparison. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So the basic approach is you talk to God as if He's there with you. So when you're drinking coffee, you offer God a cup of coffee. Why wouldn't you? Right? He's right there. You don't just
Yeah.
pretend.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you
Exactly.
really
Yeah.
actively seek to talk to God as He was a person who was next to you. You hold His hand and these kinds of things. Now you might think, look, okay, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that they've done studies on this actually, and what they find is that when you train people to listen to God's voice as if his voice was actually there, what that ends up doing is it sharpens your
Mm-hmm.
brain to literally pick up patterns in the environment. In other words, you're finding meaning in
Mm.
the chaotic environment. So, for instance, what they
Oh
find here
wow.
is that you bring some of these church people in, right? You give them this Emmanuel prayer training for 10 weeks, and you compare them against another group of people who just read the Bible, right? And what they find is that these Emmanuel prayer people, when you give them a bunch of white noise that's covering an actual message, they'll pick up that message. So what they do here is they'll get a message that's
Because their brain is
exactly,
trained to
that's
pick up the
exactly what
pattern.
happens.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
for instance, you might
Okay.
say the dog jumped over the fence. You might cover that up with a lot of white noise. But it's very, very, very hard to pick up that message. What they
Right.
find is that these people who do Emmanuel prayer, they end up picking that message up from the environment, whereas the other people don't pick it up. So that has obviously a lot of religious implications, but scientifically speaking, what that suggests is that it's almost like if you are willing to see meaning in chaos, which is life, then your brain will literally
Uh
be
huh.
trained to pick up on actual patterns that actually exist.
But you know what that sounds like to me? You ever heard the phrase taking the temperature
Yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah.
room? So it sounds like to me where a person walks into a situation and they're because their brain is like or what the Buddhists or now we have this whole like what's the new meditation craze? I'm trying to remember the term for it. It's not awareness, but that's it's about being present, right? So if you're present and your mind is sort of like I said, taking the temperature of the room, so then you are picking up those patterns. I mean, you are in your head because, like you said, you're talking to someone imaginary, but your mind is expanding to like, okay, what's happening? With the input, the feedback that's coming into you from outside. You're more alert to
Yeah,
that. Is that
yeah. I was gonna say that
yeah?
I feel like, I mean, I think what you're referring to is mindfulness. Yeah,
Mindfulness.
yes,
There you go.
mindfulness.
That's the
I
one.
practice mindfulness,
Thank you.
and maybe my perception here is totally off. But I actually, in many ways, I see mindfulness and what I'm talking about as complementary, but at polar opposite ends. Because in mindfulness, you learn to,
Okay.
be present with your body, and yeah,
Yes, your body's part of
and
it.
just be
Yeah.
present, as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to picking up noise like mind wandering and that kind of thing. So that's very focused. Whereas with what I'm talking about, it's
Mm-hmm.
very schizophrenic actually. It's
Right. Right.
allowing non-meaningful, what seems like non-meaningful events to come into your mind.
Or
Yeah,
neutral
yeah. So it's kind of,
stimulus.
yeah, the whole thing is these two things just seem to talk to each other really well. And that's sort of something that I'm trying to cultivate: schizophrenic thinking and autistic thinking at the same
Uh
time.
huh.
They're opposites to each other.
Ooh. Ooh. Okay, so let me try this. Let me pose this question to you, because you know that
Uh-huh.
I'm a writer, and we've talked about creativity a lot. Where does creativity fit into that? Because think about it. When I'm sitting down there, I'm staring at a blank paper, right? If you think about it, I am taking input in a way from something, from somewhere, right? You know, ever heard like writers say, I have my place that I go to write. It's usually a quiet place. It doesn't always have to be. Sometimes that white noise is helpful. I noticed that. But something is going on where, because there was nothing there and then I put it there. Something came into my mind and then I put it there. And I think creative people might somehow have maybe a genetic disposition towards what you're saying in some way, because you're every form of art I feel is in a way an interpretation of those inputs of the world around them, so to say.
Yeah, so there's a lot of theories of what leads people to be creative in their thinking. And one theory that's very prominent is this idea that people who are creative, quote unquote, have an open mind. And what that means is what we've been talking about. They
Uh-huh.
allow patterns to go past the filter. So a lot of us are filtering out the world
Mm.
to just focus on what we already believe, and if something seems irrelevant to that, we
Right.
filter it out. But creative people sort of allow chaos and noise to come in, and while 99% of that is crap, it does seed your imagination and it seeds your brain, and that does sort of help people to eventually develop thoughts that are not their own, that they were seeded by the environment. And so one definition of what leads to creative thinking
Mm.
is having an open mind to allow your mind to be impregnated by the environment.
I think so. I think when I started to commune with God, rapid the changes happened, and it seemed unexplained to me. It seemed like there must be a higher power, and that made me feel good to think that I'm not in this alone. So whether God is real, or whether we're living in a matrix or whatever, I think in general studies the people who have strong support systems do better in life. They're happier, they're more successful, and in a way you sort of have the ultimate support system if you have that sort of belief that, hey, there's someone omnipotent, someone divine who has my best interests
Yeah, I
at
mean, I
heart.
think it's not really one of those things that a lot of modern psychologists study. But I think anecdotally, I think we all know, right, that when you feel loved or you feel cared for, or you feel like someone's watching out after you, something about that just sort of satisfies your human desire for affiliation. Someone's got your back. One theory that does talk about this is called self-determination theory. It's basically, it says people are motivated by three
Mm-hmm.
things: autonomy, competence, and something called relatedness. And that third one is really interesting because a lot of people misunderstand that.
Mm.
They think that relatedness means, oh, I feel like I belong. People are really focused on belonging nowadays, being a part of a
Right.
group. But it's more than that. It
Right.
actually, what it means is feeling like I bring something of value to this group or this person, and feeling like this person or group brings something of value to me, so that we are interlinked. That's what relatedness is, I think, a better example.
Right.
And so someone like maybe you read this book by what's his face, Sebastian Junger. He wrote a book on called Tribe, and he gives a lot of
No.
examples from the military. Two people in the front line, for instance, they may not like each other. So let's just say, me, you and I, for instance, we're in the front lines. We're getting shot at, right? We may not like each other, but at that moment, my life is in your hands, and vice versa. So even though we may not like each other,
Mm-hmm.
there's a deep relatedness
Mm-hmm.
between each other because we have each other's back, you know. And so what Sebastian Younger sort of argues is that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people in modern society sort of are feeling deep loneliness because they feel like they don't feel needed. Society doesn't need you. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of, it
Exactly.
sounds to me like what you're talking about. They both, you feel purposed, like purposeful, like God has a purpose for me, or it could mean that God's got my back.
Yeah, I want to comment on that real quick. I agree with what you're saying. A theme going through my podcast, and if you come on my show again, which I hope you do, will be what is wrong with our society, because I feel like we have a serious problem, more than political, more than race, sexism, or whatever stuff like that. I feel like there's something about the society we live in that is making people sick, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, all that stuff. And I think we're sort of on the cusp of that. We're talking about that. So just to get into a little bit what you were saying, I heard something. I think it was on Joe Rogan's podcast about back, bringing up Thanksgiving. Long back then when we first started to colonize this country, a group of Europeans were kidnapped by a certain tribe, right? And they lived with them for about a year or two or something like that. Because remember, the crossings took a long time and they were seasonal, I think. There was only like a certain time in the year it was safe to cross. So if something happened to your colony, those colonists had to wait maybe like a year or so, or maybe 6 months until reinforcements or whatever could come. So they lived with the Indians and everything. And then finally they made a deal or whatever after a year or so to come back. We could take our those hostages back. Some of them didn't want to come back. And I know immediately people think Stockholm syndrome. But they kind of studied it, and what this guy was saying, who was on Joe Rogan's show, was that wasn't the issue. When they lived with the Indians, they weren't hostages, they weren't captives. They integrated into the society, and the Native American society was like gave your life value. So this was your job. You wake up in the morning, and this is what you do, right? Your job. If you don't perform that action, it has a negative effect on society. They don't have bread. They don't have clean water. They don't have. So it gave your life purpose and value. And I think we don't have that. So, because if I work, it doesn't matter what my job is, they could fire me today and the clock would just keep on ticking. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't, most people are like that. Most people have a job like that where they don't like what they're doing. They could be fired and replaced at any time, which is great for corporations, right? You want to have employees like that because if they act up, you could just get rid of them, right? But on a societal level, I think this is having a
Yeah, I
hugely
mean that
negative
talk you're
effect on
referencing
us.
on Joe Rogan, that podcast is actually the same guy I'm referencing. It's the same speaker. Yeah, yeah. So it's the basic idea.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
The name
I
sounded
don't know.
familiar.
The guy's not a psychologist yet. I find that his whole idea and theory is just. I think it goes way beyond anything that I've read in the actual scientific literature. It does definitely strike a deep chord. A lot of times, a lot of old
Right.
people, for instance, a lot of times they die because they put them in homes and they're no longer needed. All of their their needs are completely taken care of. They did a funny
Yeah.
study on that. No, I guess the word shouldn't be funny, but they basically went to this old folks' home, and half of the old folks,
Right.
they gave them a plant, and the other half they didn't give them anything. And what they found was that the people who had the
Hmm.
plant lived a little longer.
Oh yeah, I've heard this. Yes.
Why? Because they have some, you can't die.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to water this plant, and so like it's something silly, but it gives their life meaning. Another example of this that I see a lot is sometimes when I'm bored, I go on. I don't know this website called Reddit. Do you ever go on that? Reddit's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like a
I've
forum,
I've been on
and
there a
one
few
of the
times.
subreddits is for people who suffer from who have
Yeah. Yeah.
suicidal thoughts, and so sometimes I'll just go on there. You just listen to them, try to give them a little bit, make them feel heard. And what's very interesting is that oftentimes I'll read people's posts,
Hmm.
and they'll say, I think I'm going to kill myself tonight, blah, blah. And one of the things that I see a lot of is people who say, I would have killed myself already if it wasn't for my dog. Because if I kill myself, who's going to feed him? And I think about it.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen the
Oh,
Ricky
really?
Gervais
Okay.
show? They use that premise.
Yeah.
The
So I
new
mean, you think
Ricky
about it,
Gervais
like how
show. Yeah, he
little
used that
people
premise. Yeah.
need to survive, to give them at least purpose. Like I need someone to need me. I need to
Hmm.
have purpose. And that's just such a striking example of that. And of course, people need more than that, but that magnifies what people I think in our society are missing. They lack a deep purpose, and a reason to get up in the morning.
Yeah. All right, man. So, my next guest after you is a guy I knew from the Navy, and he was a really nice guy. We actually weren't that close when I was in the Navy, but you know people that you work. We work together on the ship. He's a shaman. He ended up becoming a shaman, and we're gonna get into a lot of spirituality and stuff like that with him. So I would like to just pivot our conversation a little bit because this is something I know you've expressed a lot, and I've in the last few years started got into it, which is men today in our society sort of being demasculated. And I've read Jordan Peterson's book. Was it the 12 Rules or something like that? And I recently read something on Ben Shapiro. I know those are hot names. A lot of our friends probably aren't going to be too excited about that, but I don't care, man. I'm open minded. I take information from anyone, and you know what? No one has all the answers, but some people, they have some good information. So, what do you think about those topics? Sort of men today being demasculated, and do you
Yeah,
have any feelings on that you can share?
I definitely agree that I think it's a backlash, though, right? So our society, at least our American society, for a long time was very masculine, and I think a lot of women and feminine
Uh-huh.
perspectives felt sort of voiceless. And what we're seeing is the backlash, and I
Uh-huh.
foresee that in the future we're going to get a counter backlash. And
Hmm.
in fact, you're already seeing it, right? So a lot of liberal-minded people have very feminine thinking patterns. I don't mean that they're feminine; I just mean they think feminine. Whereas a lot of
Right.
conservatives tend to have very masculine thinking patterns. And the problem that I see with that is people become polarized, and so they end
Okay.
up expressing usually the most negative versions, caricatures of those. Right. So you have the whiny liberal who
Right.
demands that you do whatever they say because you hurt their feelings. Right. That's a negative characterization of feminine thinking patterns. And then you have the conservative who's like, fuck your
Yes.
feelings. Who cares about your feelings? Man up. I care nothing about
Yeah.
emotions. Right. So you have these caricatures. And that I think is the biggest sort of flaw
Yeah.
of this whole
Yeah.
argument.
And
It's
we're
just
ignoring
these
the middle.
caricatures.
Yeah, and we're ignoring the whole middle of that. We're talking about the two extremes on opposite sides of that, and we're ignoring the middle, which I believe most of us exist in the middle, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. Because if you turn on to CNN or any kind of traditional media, for one thing, it's depressing, it causes anxiety, and I feel like they're almost inciting a civil war. It's so polar opposite. There's only the extremes on there, and whenever they get a guest, let's say you're watching a liberal network and they put on a conservative guest, the person is usually incompetent to defend their point of views, or the person is competent, but the liberal and the conservative, end up just screaming at each other, and we don't advance the ideas. We don't come to
Oh yeah, I agree.
you
That's
know what I mean?
obviously it's for
You know what I'm saying?
entertainment purposes. I would personally say that the goal is not though to be in this. Not even. I don't think you're saying this either. I think what you're saying is that there's variety, right? For me, it seems like the goal is actually
Right.
to be both feminine and to be both positive. And what I mean by
Okay.
that though is to be the positive aspects of masculinity and the positive aspects of femininity, and unite those. That's I think
Right.
what a major component that I think is
Exactly.
missing from a lot
Yes.
of people.
Yes. I think why this issue became a big deal for me is because, I'm married, and I, my wife didn't grow up with a father. She had some male figures in her life, an uncle and a grandfather. She didn't see that sort of male presence, and she knows that that's a big deal. I think if you look at studies, you could find correlations between not having a strong father figure in the house and all kinds of different things. But what she kept telling me was like, hey, our son, because he's kind of on a little bit of a shyer side. I know he's young and stuff like that, but she's like, hey, teach him how to. She says dance. Teach him how to be nice to a woman, how to talk to a woman if he likes her. And I'm like, the way I was raised. I was born in the 70s. The way I was raised, and the things that my dad told me, and the things that my mother, my sisters, my aunts told me how to be, I don't think I could tell that to my son. It was very aggressive. And I think in today's society, if I told my son to be that way, he'd probably go to jail. You know what I mean? So I don't know. and I talked to a few women on the show about it, and they understand. They agree with what I'm saying. It's sort of confusing. It's sort of they want a man to be aggressive, but they don't want him to be an asshole. So where's the balance in all this? Because I feel like if we follow the what the media is saying, women aren't going to be happy with the guys out there. They're just not going to be at all. You know what I mean? That traditional roles that we have in our head where the man is sort of to take charge. If there's a bump in the night, he goes downstairs and investigates that. You know what I mean? I don't think women are gonna like where the man goes, well, we're equal. You go
Mm-hmm,
downstairs,
mm-hmm.
I'll stay
I
upstairs.
agree. No, yeah, I mean, when I said that you got to unite those two, I don't mean unite them societally, although I do think that's good too. I meant unite them within the individual. I meant that I think the goal of all people should be to find for instance, for you, to find the positive femininity and integrate that. That's kind of one of Jung's main ideas, right? And the same thing with women, they need to find the positive masculinity and integrate that into themselves.
Right.
And our goal should be tied to use the negative aspects of both. But your more central question here is, yeah, and so I think you either are masculine
Well,
or you're not. But I think people like Jung would say it's
I
not
can't hear you,
about
brother.
that. It's about
Oh, there you go.
showing the positive masculine. And the positive masculine is being aggressive. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Being assertive, taking control, laying down the law,
Right.
creating order, right?
Right.
Those are all positive masculine things. The more negative masculine, huh?
Right.
Yeah, the
Creating
more negative
boundaries.
masculine things,
Right.
yes, creating boundaries would be a great
Creating
one.
boundaries.
Doing, to me, you could summarize masculinity in one word: do. You know, whereas you'd summarize femininity in the word be.
Okay.
But yeah, so your job is to integrate do and be together.
Oh, okay.
But so in terms of negative masculinity, you see things like
Hmm.
people who are quick to anger, people who are dismissive of others, people who don't value emotions. I think those are the things that we need to get a grip on. And so I don't think it's a
Right.
question of masculine.
So we find that in both sexes.
Mm-hmm,
I would say that we find that in both
mm-hmm,
sexes. Both sexes do what you're saying. I think what I'm trying to speak on is that yes, embrace what you're saying, both the
mm-hmm,
feminine and the masculine, because they exist in everyone. I think what I was trying to talk about was the roles, traditional roles, like the bump in the night.
mm-hmm,
The man, usually the man is asleep, right? You see it in the movie. The wife kind of nudges him, hey, someone's in the house. Oh man, you know what I mean? He grabs a
mm-hmm,
shotgun, grabs a bat, he goes downstairs. Or maybe something as simple as opening the door for
mm-hmm.
your someone that you're courting or paying for a meal. Or in traditional dating, I think the woman doesn't want to initiate sex. Maybe some do. I think the woman still wants the guy to be the aggressor, the one to start it. What I'm saying is that the roles, I think we're in a spot where people are confused and don't know, okay, so who does this? I'm sure you're familiar with this study. I don't know what it is, but it's the study where if one person is sitting in a room alone, right, and they hear a person in another room fall, they had an accident, they fall, they run into the other room and try to help. But if there's 10 people in that room and they hear someone fall, they're less likely to intervene because they're sort of looking at the other person. Well, what's my job? What's my purpose? Do I help? No, this guy will help. So I'm thinking that we're sort of confused in that same way, where we're saying, okay, I don't do this anymore. I am not the aggressor. I do not open the door. I do not pay for the meal. I do not whatever's traditionally male. So whose job is it now? And I think men and women are sort of
Okay,
looking at
yeah.
each
So
other like, what's next?
definitely, the gender roles that we used to subscribe to are sort of changing for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. Is that good or is that bad? I don't think it's either good or bad. I think that there's a lot of traditional ways of thinking that we lose, right? But I don't think we should look to tradition as the end all be all,
Right.
right? So sometimes we say, hey, this thing is changing, but tradition says this. For me, it's like, well, it doesn't matter what tradition says. I think we should always be looking at tradition and asking ourselves, is there any good in this? If yes, then leave it the hell alone. I don't care what new ideas you have, leave it alone. This works. But some things,
Right.
maybe they don't work. We need to question them. So, for instance, slavery, right? There's a major tradition of slavery in many countries for a long time. we got rid of that, right? But I think, yeah, I think
Right.
tradition is
Right.
simply a perspective, just like progressivism is they're both border, like Jordan Peterson says. You can't abandon one or the other. You have to let them clash. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think in terms of masculine gender roles, yeah, I think we've we don't really understand what it means to be a man, and so for that does create a lot of confusion among men. They don't know what women want, because I agree with you. I think a lot of women do want a man to be more traditionally manly. I think
In certain respects,
you said in
yes.
certain respects. Yeah, you cut off there for about 5 seconds. Say that again.
Hello. No, I was just saying that they do want men to be more traditionally manly, but not in every like they want to have a say. And I think traditionally it
Mm-hmm.
was, hey, the man is the boss, and what he says goes. So that's sort of an example of that's not cool, but other
Yeah,
things
I
are,
think
and
so. I mean,
we gotta
I
find
do
that
think though
balance
that
there.
in terms of dating and that kind of thing, I think that I don't know. I think there's a lot of wisdom to our ideas about how to get women, and so you might have a buddy here and there who says, "Oh, here's how you get a girl," right? And there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of that. And when I was growing
Yeah,
up, people would say, "Hey, you want to keep a girl, you
yeah,
gotta
yeah.
not call her right away," they'd introduce me to these games, right? And I always thought that was just so
Right,
silly.
right, right.
There's all this science now that supports all of that,
Yeah,
that you can actually attract women by creating this idea of uncertainty. So I think
yeah.
there's a lot of wisdom within collective ideas.
Not just women, not just women. Women are doing the same thing. So this is a topic I want to get into another time, because there used to be sort of, I guess, an oral tradition is the word that we could use, that women would get together and they would tell each other like, this is
Mm-hmm.
how the man is courting you, this is how you behave. And the same thing with men. We used to have that. There's things that I've heard, and a lot of it is very sexist and stuff like that too. But what I'm saying is that maybe the actual word or the material that was being passed down through generation could be updated, could be revised. It's not maybe as relevant today as it was some other time. But the tradition is missing, is what I'm saying. We should be passing ideas down, the ideas that my grandfather had went to my dad, went to me, went, kind of go out. We're missing that. But okay, so we're running out of time. I have another interview coming up. Right before I go, I want to talk about this idea of how split we are. And we keep hearing this term, a
No, I mean,
civil
I don't think
war.
there's
Do
going
you
to
have
be an
any
actual
any
physical
thoughts on
civil
that?
war. I think it's going to be more and more extreme of what we've already had. Yeah, I don't know. I think people are polarized, and they're becoming more masculine and more in a negative way, and more feminine in a negative way. So I don't really see a big outcome of that. It's just going to be more of the same in my book.
I bring it up because a lot of people, I don't know what's going on, man. I mean, we used to be able to talk to our neighbors, and it was okay to think differently and feel differently. And people being of different religions would be like, oh, yeah, that's Tom. He's Jewish, or he's Muslim, or he's Buddhist, and, he's the next door neighbor. Nice guy. And something's going on. And it's not about that. It seems to be politically motivated. Oh, that guy's a liberal. Screw that guy. I remember when I came into the army and we were in basic training, I was talking to a guy, really nice guy, really smart, and someone said they were from California, and he was like, said to me, kind of leaned over and was like, they're all communists over there. And I'm like, look, dude, I just lived there for the last 7 years. They're not. They're not communists. There's not a bunch of commies in California, dude. I haven't met so many communists in my life. Maybe they have views that are different than you, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a poison leaking into people's ears. Kind of like what you're saying, that everyone who's liberal is a certain way and
Oh
everyone
no, I
who's
mean, I think that
conservative
that poison
is
is
a
probably
certain way, and that
social media,
nothing
and
could be further
what I
from the
mean by
truth.
that is, I think a long time ago, before social media, these differences always existed. Your neighbors were those extreme liberals or extreme conservatives, but the reason why we
Yes.
got along is because the age-old advice: don't talk about politics. So if you were an extremely liberal person, I invited you over, and I was extremely conservative, we would get along
Okay.
simply because we wouldn't talk about that crap. But now with social media, people are blaring out what they believe, and I think that's
Right.
the problem, is that we've got they have to tell you what they believe. So at my place of work, for instance, people will readily tell you what you should vote for or how you should think, even though 30 years ago people would say that's so unprofessional. So I think the main problem is that we have no filter anymore. We think, I feel strongly
Right.
about this, therefore I must tell you. It's a false narrative. The same narrative that people feel when they have a lot of anger, right? I feel angry about this,
Mm.
so I have to let it out. And I think that's just a false narrative. We need to shut up a little bit more.
All right. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Jerry.
Yeah.